Hello, and thank you for joining us for Office 365 Protecting Against Data Loss. Today we have TCDI and Krish Services Group. TCDI has been in the market for over 3 decades now, and they're very unique to the marketplace because they are a hybrid organization with divisions dedicated to cybersecurity and computer forensics, and the other on developing software focused on e-discovery and litigation management with distinct data privacy and security concerns. In addition, Krish Services specializes in Office 365 collaboration solutions and Azure app modernization, and they are a software development and IT consulting services provider helping organizations modernize applications and migrate to the cloud. Today we are joined by Puri Srinivalu, who is the principal architect at Krish Services Group, and he has 20 years of experience in the enterprise software development field. He is obviously an expert in SharePoint and Office 365. Puri founded Krish Services Group in 2011 in Cleveland, Ohio. And myself, I am Bogdan Salamacha, and I'm the senior cybersecurity engineer here at TCDI. Been in the IT and security field for a little bit over 9 years now. For today's agenda, these are the topics that we'll be covering: information protection, data loss prevention, DLP policies. We'll have a fascinating brief demo presented by Puri, and then we'll go over and touch on the topics of proactive and reactive threat management, as well as monitoring and auditing logs. So to kick off, I'll transfer it over to Puri, and he'll cover information protection.
Thank you, Bogdan. Good afternoon, everyone. So let's dive into the topic here, information protection. So information protection in the new world of work. So as we have here statistics, 41% of employees say mobile business apps change how they work, and 85% of organizations keep sensitive information in the cloud. That has changed dramatically over with this COVID situation. And 88% of organizations say or no longer have confidence to detect and prevent loss of sensitive data. This is the data from on the devices, desktops. It's very hard to put all the policies in a single place. So confidence levels is dropping rapidly as the content is shared across multiple devices. And 58% of employees and information workers have accidentally shared sensitive information to the wrong person, not intentionally, but sometimes an accident happens. Either it's by simply auto-correction in the email or not knowing the sensitivity in the information people have accidentally shared. And to prevent that, Microsoft has got 4 pillars of technology solutions available in Office 365. And one of the important things is that the information, as we know, could be on your desktop, could be in the cloud, could be, shared with internal employees and external employees. So we have to make sure there are several elements of security needs to be in place for the protection of the data. One of the key things is that first we got to ensure right people have the right data. That is through identity and access management controlled through the Azure AD, and also make sure the information is only available to the right employees at the right time. All of these could be applied at Azure AD level, but kind of telling information that is maybe a file can be shared with a person. But what if the file contains sensitive information? How do you block that from outside vendors? How do you block that from specific set of users? So it's very important that the information is protected, not only just from a file perspective, but what's inside the file. That's how the compliance needs to be met. And also getting into the threat management perspective, you spammed into or you tricked into releasing information. And also security management is a very important aspect of it to make sure the right security policies are in the right place and make sure that the security aspect is thought through from beginning to the end of information lifecycle. So now let's dive into information protection. So one of the key elements of information protection is data loss prevention. So why does one need data loss prevention? So one of the key things here is most of the businesses have to comply with industry regulations And organizations also have to protect sensitive information to their industry. It could be customers' data, it could be personal data of the employees, or it could be intellectual property or the compliance industry, like it could be for financial data. So it's very important to make sure it is not shared inadvertently with unintended parties. It's very important to be in compliance. A lot of industries, for example, say HIPAA regulations or PCI or FINRA. So it's very important that particular policies are in place to make sure that data is not shared. And while you're also protecting the information, but you have to keep in mind that you're not stopping the information worker from doing their job, and you can't stop their productivity. So the policies has to be in such a way that it's very user-friendly and it does not stop both the authors and the person who's receiving information is stopping them and blocking them to do what they need to do. And also, same time, the data loss prevention also should guide the user to make the right decision. Like example, if the policy tells you can't share, and okay, what's my choices here? Or you think that policy is telling not to share, but you think it can be shared. So how do you go about that? So you need to have a system in place to make it happen. So DLP should take care of all of these to make sure you protect the information and also guide the user through the process.
And just to jump in here, from the forensic side, we've had more than one occurrences where we were engaged by an organization to perform a forensic investigation for the potential loss of intellectual property or other sensitive information, which at the end of the day just turned out to be a bad clarification and what's allowed by policy and what's allowed by employees and how they can access data. In this instance, or in at least one of the instances, one of the users, she thought that it would just be convenient to email the documents that had PII or PHI in them to herself, to her personal email, just so she can work on it from home. And it turned into a very expensive ordeal. And typically something like that, we ended up finding out was that it could have been solved with a little bit more guidance, a little bit more training, and like Pururi mentioned, very clear directions as to how a system like this can be used, and even having the system correctly configured and established and users trained on how to use it when wanting to work remote.
All right, so let's take a look at the Microsoft's approach to this information protection. And as mentioned before, the information protection, it starts not only just in the cloud, Office 365, but also from your device, that's your desktop or tablet or phone, but also from your migration to the cloud. You could have content on premise, and it could be Azure data center, like Azure servers. So you have to make sure the data, sensitive data, is protected throughout the life cycle, whether it's inside your organization or you have outside vendors. So it's always important you have the right approach to protecting the content in all of these areas. So let's take a look at the approach. So the most important thing, is that you need to know, the first and foremost, you need to know the content that you have. That is, how do you discover the content? Let's say that you have a large amount of files that you have on-prem, or it could be on your desktop or on your file shares, but now you're trying to move to the cloud. So you want to make sure the policies has to be in such a way that you got to detect information. When I say detecting sensitive information, it is like, I want to make sure that we can detect all the credit cards data, or we detect all of the HIPAA. It could be like the utterances of the word, like diseases, along with a social security number, or with a person identifiable information. It could be their names along with their social security number, along with their medical record number, or the combination of those. There are a lot of regulations. You need to able to identify the sensitivity of the data and apply the policies to meet the regulations. So we got to have a tools to detect the sensitive data based on a policy. Policy could be stating that, okay, nobody can share a HIPAA with outside other organization, as simple as that. Then you need to be able to classify the data. So like apply the labels saying that, okay, this is sensitive, highly confidential, this is internal only to organization, or it could say non-business content. Could apply then through labels. And also now protecting content. There is this credit card data, and what do you do with when you detect them? Are you trying to allow them to share with outside, or are you trying to say encrypt the message if it's an email, or plain and simple that, okay, this particular content that has credit card in it or has a HIPAA data in it, access is restricted only to the author of the information when you upload a file to Office 365, or you can say that kind of content sensitivity we can allow only to internal to the organization, but definitely not allowed to go to the organization, and able to stop that right when it's happening. Okay. We will see that demo on a little bit on how to block the information from shared with outside when there is sensitive information in that file. And not but last, least, very important to monitor the alerts. There is a policy that has kicked in when somebody's uploaded a file that contains HIPAA information, or you're trying to upload some credit card data, and you want to make sure there are some alerts that tells the administrator or tells the end user, hey, by the way, you're uploading a file that's violates the organization policy, and how do you remediate it? So you got to make sure you have an approach for all of these, and Office 365 information protection does allow to discover content, classify them, and most importantly, protect them when policies are met, the conditions, and then you're able to monitor it. Now, let's take some of the building blocks in these Microsoft Information Protection Toolkit. Our focus right now for the session is the Office 365 data loss prevention, but there are other technologies and toolkit solutions available in the Microsoft Office 365 and Azure space, how to protect information. For our purposes, we're going to talk more into how to leverage the Office 365 data loss prevention, policy definitions, and how to define a policy. We're going to look into those features. Okay, so now let's talk about data loss prevention very specifically inside Office 365. As we briefly mentioned before, you got to be able to detect and classify and protect from accidental sharing and educate the user like, hey, what's happening here, but also getting into the monitoring aspect of it and how your data is being protected. Okay, so let's look at first thing here is how it's easy to create policies that find sensitive content. And let's take a quick example of what makes that use case. But before we jump into the use case and look at the sample, I want to highlight the fact here that you have multiple roles involved. So who exactly is this DLP for? Okay, so there are multiple roles come into this, but the key, you have generally the IT administrators who have to put the policies into and make sure they have the protection turned on according to the company policy. But however, the definition of what is a policy and compliance security officers are really in charge, that they make sure that they have a solution from beginning to the end, that is from the detection to all this monitoring. They're involved in the entire life cycle of it and make sure all the sensitive information is protected. So there's this key role for compliance security officers. Their job is to make sure they have the right complete solution in place. But the most important thing is the information worker is the one that's actually producing and using the information, and you're going to make sure the protection does not get into their productivity. It's otherwise a lot of tools out there that it's just get into stopping the user and not allowing them to guide them through the process. So it's very important that DLP is designed for these roles from the information worker, but also the compliance officers as well.
And that's a very important point, I think, because many times that we've seen with a lot of DLP implementation with a lot of our clients is, it's very easy to turn it on, configure it, and just throw the kitchen sink at it. But usually without clearly identifying who the DLP is for, identify the target roles, educating end users, like Pruri said, providing insights into exactly what you're trying to do. In many occurrences, those DLP implementations usually caused more havoc than solutions. It was blocking data it should have been blocking. It was letting data go that it should have been letting go. And this is definitely a vital part. So it's very good that you covered this, Pruri.
All right, so now let's understand the locations within Office 365 where the accidental or inappropriate sharing happens. So we all know in the collaboration space of within Office 365, it could be you collaborating on the Teams, or it could be Exchange online, where you're sending emails with attachments, or in body of the email itself has some sensitive information. But also the major leaks does happen when you're really sharing a large files and has a lot of data in it, and has a massive impact. So SharePoint Online, where the content is, you share a folder or you share an entire site with somebody, or it could be as simple as that one file that has got hundreds of credit card information, hundreds of accounts information, or patients information in it. So it's very important that you have to have policy to catch in all of these locations. You cannot just say, I'm going to only protect the SharePoint Online, but how about OneDrive for business, where I am sharing with outside organization if it's turned on, available, or I'm sending an email with an attachment that has of this confidential information. So the data loss prevention has to cover all of these areas, and Office 365 does protect the information in all of these locations. Not only the Teams, Exchange Online, and OneDrive, but also opening up the files in Office desktop tool like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook. When you open the file, or when you're trying to attach a file and try to share, it should be also blocking you from making it happen. So the policies has to work in across these locations, but also the Office tools as well. But you have to keep in mind that when you take a protection in these locations, you may have to define the rules of, okay, if I see this particular sensitive information in SharePoint Online, what do you do with it? Do you block sharing, or do you allow a user to override? Maybe because it's a false positive or negative, right? So how do you let them override because business user knows it? If you think that's allowed policy, you have one document that took some numbers as supposed to be a product number, it took as a social security number, right? So it's very close matching. So it made you a warning, right? Or you got to allow sometimes user to override. You got to test these policies before you let it into production mode. And also at the same time, notification of the emails. Okay, some policy is being triggered. You may want to notify the owner of that content or a compliance officer on violation has occurred or is occurring in spot, so that they learn what's happening.
And just a comment there, often with OneDrive, we'll sometimes share files, and we've seen this occur in the wild where someone will share a file, and many of you may have seen this before, where you can share a file where there's a permission setting where anyone that has a link or anyone that has a copy can view this file. You want to be careful with those types of configurations, and there's ways to prevent that type of sharing. That way, in the event that that link got into the wrong hands, obviously unauthorized persons or unauthorized groups won't be able to see those files if that link got out, especially if you completely disable that functionality.
Yep. So let's take a quick look at how a policy can be defined and what is data loss prevention policy looks like. So as we know, the sensitive information across Office 365 can be in all of these 4 locations. That is Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, and Teams chat and channel messages. So, and these policies can be defined saying that we want to make sure that we apply a policy in all of these or one of these. And not only when you say SharePoint sites, you can actually pick and choose WhatsApp collections. When you say Exchange mail, you can also not only just say all of the mailboxes, but also can define a specific policy for a specific groups you create where you want to monitor some special groups. So you have this choice of defining a policy in what locations, and we can define those includes and excludes. So hey, I would like to have monitor all of these SharePoint site collections, but these couple of site collections, I don't want to worry about leaking because we are going to limit only to the specific 3 people only that we know that they're a finance team and they need to have all access to finance. But some of the site collections, nobody can see any of the finance data, right? So you can define those policies at specific locations. And also you can pick and choose when you create these policies some 100+ sensitive information types. So what is a sensitive information type? So an example, credit cards, medical record numbers, personal information like diseases or medical conditions of a patient, right? Or you could have intellectual property that have a special way to detect them. and you could have multiple countries banking information. And also you could talk about combination of them together. So if credit card data and with the banking routing number and the personal information that's highly sensitive, you can have some rules. Okay, and it's very important to make sure you can customize some of these actions, because not one rule fits all. And as you may have to tone these on from include all to exclude and include, because as you put these policies in place, you learn more and more. But the data loss prevention policy definition allows you to configure the locations and what to include and what not to include here. And at this point, for Teams chat and channel messages, you can put the policies onto the general Teams and channel messages, but as of right now, you cannot apply to the private messages one-to-one. But it's of a month ago, Microsoft said it's coming soon. So we will have to just wait and see how this is going to roll it out. But I think you can expect it, and when they say coming soon, it's most probably 3 months, the next major release to all the tenants. So it also depends on your subscription to it, but I think it's coming soon. So let's take a very simple DLP policy use case here. So in this case, we want to take a quick look at that a HR person is working with employee data. And we want to block this HR employee is working with outside consultant. And we want to make sure that it is important that the HR employee, HR department, that where they're working with this data, they can see all this data of the employee or any medical conditions they're looking at it. But we want to make sure that they cannot send it by mistake outside. So let's say that the HR is working in SharePoint Online and they have a file they're working on and looking at some policies. They're trying to get them into a medical plan at the organization. They're trying to have a conversation and looking at the data, and also they're reviewing the data. But in that particular case, they share this document with outside vendor. We want to make sure that it cannot go outside. And we should put a policy in place that it should block the sharing. A very clear message should be shown to the user that, sorry, this file cannot be shared outside of the organization. At the same time, we also want to make sure the email goes out as soon as that happens, and that is logged and trigger an email to that administrator or the compliance officer. Okay, so let's take a quick look at how that will look in SharePoint Online. So let's take a quick look here. So we have defined the policies and deployed it, and it's active. And so what happens here is that I am trying to share this document which has some sensitive information, and I'm trying to share this with outside a vendor. In this case, trying to send specific people. In this case, I'm trying to send it to outside vendor, in this case, personal information with my personal email ID. And here is what the warning by the system. It's actually telling the user that this item contains sensitive information. It can be shared with people outside the organization. So in this way, it blocks, there is no oops, or there is no sharing the information with personal email IDs or outside the organization. And it's clearly telling that, sorry, you can't share this. And here, we're educating the user now. The tip is saying that, why is it an issue? Because this particular item contains the social security number and also has some diseases specified in ICD-10-CM, that is the disease codes, and also International Classification of Diseases, ICD-9-CM. It is telling you very clearly what the violation here. So it's blocking the user from sharing by mistake. But also at the same time, if the user thinks that this particular issue that's raised by is not, I think, let's say that it's a kind of false positive, they may notify as to their admin, hey, this item doesn't conflict with the organization policies. But however, in this case, because they don't want to take any chance, there is no overriding by the user to say, hey, let me override the company policy and let me share, because it is too much risk to do that. So in this case, they're not allowing, whenever they found social security number and the combination of that along with the ICD codes. So let's take a look so that we see what's in here. So I have here, I'm looking at the patient data, Okay, I have the patient's name and I have the social security number, but also I have mentioned some conditions in here, okay, for that particular. So here, system is smart enough to apply the rules and detect it, but also blocking the action, like not sharing it. So that's what we talk about. A DLP policy should allow take right action, but also educate the user through the process. Okay. So that's just an example of how we can apply DLP policy and catch the sensitive data being leaked to outside user of the organization. Okay, let's take a look at how to define such a policy and what kind of enforcement options one has. So when the rule of saying that, hey, in this case, can share the sensitive data, where multiple actions can be applied, what to happen when your rule gets triggered. So you can say that you can notify and educate end user, like you can say notify saying, hey, you can't share, or you can say totally block the sharing, not only outside, but also inside. You kind of block them sharing, block them sending, as well as you can say with an email type location, you can also say automatically encrypt the sensitive emails and go through the encryption process so that the end user receives it as encrypted emails and they have way of viewing that in very securely. So you can also push alerts to the IT admins for on violations or get log for DLP logs, like, hey, sensitive information is being shared or violation occurs. You can read from the audit log and then you can report off of that. Okay, but also say apply the same kind of policy on a mobile device that is prompting the user like this violation has occurred. It could be on an iPhone or Android device or a tablet or a desktop. Of Office tools, it will show the same policy text highlighting the telling the user what the policy is and how to recover from it. Okay, so here let's talk about from the policy templates perspective. So the policies, think that you have to start from scratch. Okay, do I have to go from defining these policies from authoring from every possible combination of rules, or does the product provide some templates? In this case, Office 365 has very good templates to start off with. I think it'll meet like 80% of majority of the industry's use cases. Could be like for financial data protection, or PII, health information, HIPAA, GDPR, general data, protection regulations, right? And also not only that, but you can take that as a starting point and you can define your own actions on top of what the out-of-the-box provides. We'll take a look at that shortly here. But also, once you turn on within the Office 365 Security and Compliance Admin Center, it can also default the protection policy for most common sensitive content. What that means is that if you let the insights turn on, the deep content analysis happens in Office 365 as you use it, and then it will detect and also suggest you what most probably the best templates based on the content to apply for organization. You can start off with what the Office 365 recommends, but also in our case, we're going to see a demo where you go and author one from scratch and how to tweak it to your specific organization needs. Okay. So to start off with, there are 40 plus templates and 100 plus sensitivity types, like detecting them and the multiple actions there, as you saw, whether you block the sharing of the content or you block from outside versus you block totally from inside, or you remove total access to the user, and across all those locations of Office 365 emails exchange or exchange emails, Teams, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive. And also, as we talk about, you can apply the rules with conditions. So let's take a look at the policy controls and policy authoring. So in this case, we are looking at the protecting HIPAA sensitive information. What it's trying to explain is that we have conditions for every policy, and then you have exceptions, and you can have some actions. So that means when the conditions are met, what action to take place, and also what kind of notifications should go out when the condition occurs, and also do you allow user to override the behavior. So it's very important that you think this through. Do you allow the end user to continue the business as usual by overriding and justify the override, or not? Because if you block the user from doing their particular function based on the risk factors of that information type, sensitivity type, you may sometimes allow or may not allow, so that it gets logged and it gets notified along with justification. A policy should have all of these things to thought through before, and you can tweak these more and add more to that. Okay. So let's take a look at what the content does or does not look like. So in this case, we are saying that when the content contains social security number, in this case, and drug enforcement agency number, if it occurs even once, that means the document contains even one time the social security number, or contains a drug, DEA number, drug enforcement agency number for controlled drugs, and also contains the international classification of diseases that the control, like in disease codes, ICD codes in the document. We are trying to say that if content is shared with people outside the organization, we should block totally from outside. So that is the expected behavior. In our case, is that we cannot share with outside users. So in my case, the example here is that we are saying block people from sharing only people outside the organization. Okay, that means everyone inside your organization can still get to the document that you upload. Also, that means that in some cases, if you have some other combination of this content, you could totally block the users from getting to the document, except for the content owner. That means whoever upload the content, the file, can get to the file. When it comes to the notification, we can notify the person who sent or shared or modified the content, and also the owner of the document itself. You can customize the policy tip text. That means that when you open this document, you can see on the top is in the Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or even when you upload the document and when you try to share, you can show the policy text as well. So here, I would always recommend to put some text that is to your policy as an organization. Also, put a reference to a policy number or policy document that you have a central location where everything is explained to the end user. Okay, so it's very important to kind of see what works for you, and put a policy tip for the user information worker. When they see this hack occurs, they see it very clearly. When the incident occurs, you can record this into your alerts and reports as a medium alert, or it's a high alert, or it's a medium low high, and send an email to these people. In this case, I'm sending to the admin, but again, it could be a compliance officers or administrators as well, or a very specific group. In your case, for this policy violation, goes to a very specific group. Okay. So let's take a look at the demo. So now I have logged in here as tenant admin in my case, or it could be anybody that has been assigned a role for a security officer within your tenant. There are multiple roles that you can assign. You don't have to be global tenant, but it could be assigned permission level for security and compliance. There are multiple roles related to this. Once you have the privileges to get onto the compliance center through admin section, security, and data loss prevention. As you can see here, we talked about initially that there are multiple elements within the security and compliance of Office 365. There is the identity management, to data loss prevention, that's the information protection, threat protection, right? And then the security controls. So here, when it comes to the security and compliance center, you see data loss prevention. In the data loss prevention, you came to the policies, where you can see all of the policies that you have defined in an organization, and you have a quick dashboard that shows what are all the DLP policy matches have occurred, in the last 30 days or a week, and also any false positives. That means when a false positive occurs, and if allow the overrides, you can see how many times the override has occurred in the last 1 week. Also, all of your policies that you have created, you can come and publish these policies either on, off, or could be a test mode. Test mode means that you're still trying to evaluate whether your DLP rules are matching exactly what you want to detect, have some sample data, test data that is catching exactly what you need so that you can avoid your false positives as much as possible and understand your override logic, override rules. So let's take a policy in this case where we uploaded the HR data and where this particular document was blocked for sharing. Okay. To look at in this particular library, let's talk about something else too. I'm only seeing 3 documents here. There are actually 5 documents in this library shared with me. I am Megan here. I'm an information worker. I have access to this library. But whereas there's supposed to be 5 documents in here, let's take a quick look at that. Why the other 2 documents are not coming up for me? Because the other 2 documents are violating a policy, and the DLP has taken an action that I cannot share the document because the policy dictates that I should block access to everybody. Okay, so as administrator, let me go into that same library. Here, I log in as administrator of the site corruption administrator and tenant. As I can see here, there are actually 5 documents. Out of that, I'm able to only see 3 documents. The reason I'm able to see only 3 because the other 2 were totally blocked. So let's take a look at the policy. So this policy is saying that access to the item is blocked for everyone except its owner. The reason is it has found the debit card number in this particular document. Yes, let's take a look at that. So in this case, I have credit card information for several of my customers, their card type, bank, card number, the holder, expiration date, everything you need about this particular credit card. So obviously it's highly sensitive and has a lot of credit card data in here. So the policy dictates that whenever you see this credit card data, it has to be blocked for everybody in the organization, not to be shared with anybody. So this policy is actually kicked in from just GDPR. So let's take a look at the policy here. So the policy is status is turned on. So that means I can turn it off or turn it on, or I can put the test mode. In this case, it is turned on. Then where exactly is this turned on? So I have said I've turned it on for all the locations, all the distribution groups, all the SharePoint sites, all of the OneDrive accounts, and all the teams as well. I could choose not to by just turning on and off specific location, but in this case, for testing purposes, I have turned it on. Let's take the most important one, the policy settings. That's where exactly it's telling that I cannot share with anybody. So let's take the name of the policy here. It's saying that high volume of user-sensitive content found. When it happens, it is saying that it's looking for inside my organization, find debit card, license number, national identification number, passports, tax information number, SSN. And the actions are restrict access to the content immediately, notify users with email and policy tips, and send incident reports to administrator. So I can change the rule here by telling some of these rules, right? I can add more rules by adding more sensitive info. I can define number of instances that can occur, right? And accuracy is 25 to 100%. So what the accuracy is that there is the deep content analysis. There's some artificial intelligence behind this to say it's going to apply a lot of logic behind to detect if there's a credit card number or some other kind of close proximity to some other number, right? So use so many validations, it's going to come with a accuracy behind the scenes. So if it is only accurate more than 70%, it's going to hit that credit card number rule. And also when it is shared with inside, what we are saying is that we can restrict access, encrypt the content if it is in the email, or if it is SharePoint, you block from people sharing, but also restrict from everyone, and only the content owner will have access to this. So it's very important when you define these rules and conditions and actions, you have to be very clear what we are trying to do with it. When something hit the condition, our actions are you block it totally, or you block to outside, or you say encrypt email message when that are hit. Okay, so that explains the rules that got applied for the content that has credit card number information like this, where we have the information of all the credit cards, and this is why it's getting blocked. That's why these two documents are restricted to Megan, because she's not the site owner, nor she's not the owner of those files. However, the test document is available for Megan to view because that is not restricted. As per the policy that we have defined, in this case, the HIPAA policy got kicked in. This particular policy of HIPAA got kicked in for the test document because test document has the disease codes as well as the social security number. So let's look at that policy that I defined it this morning while testing it. I said, okay, my rules for the HIPAA is that the moment I see social security number and I see the classification of diseases in a document, I want it to be blocked for outside my organization. It is very important to understand some of these combinations. And in my case, as if I shared outside, I should block from sharing and restrict access shared content only to outside the organization. So as I just mentioned, I had one rule you saw that where I block from everyone, but in this case, I'm only blocking from outside. As I said, for email messages, you can encrypt and then you can share with the outside. Okay. So that gives you a quick overview of how to define your rules, how to define your conditions, how to define your exceptions, if any. Like you can say and add an exception to say if the content is recipient domain is so and so, you allow that. So you can have some exceptions in there. Or if attachment file extension is, let's say, a very specific proprietary format, or if the address contains some words, you can have some exceptions into the rules. And one of the things here is that, let's say you want to have any of these here, you can say add sensitive info types. You can define your own sensitive information types with the rules and regular expressions and the way to detect it so that the engine can detect those particular document strings or phrases, and the rules can be applied. Once you have it, you can deploy it to the compliance center. You can actually add those custom ones. So right now we are seeing 100 plus sensitive types. All of them are Microsoft Corporation, but you can have your own employee ID or intellectual property number or some other unique way to make sure that you cannot have information leaked to the outside or inappropriate parties within the organization. You can add your own with your own publishing. Okay, there are Microsoft articles on how to do that and how to publish it. We're not going to cover this in this particular webinar, but you could define your own sensitivity types and deploy them. And with that sensitive types, you can define now the rules of add to that conditions. You can have and, you can add an R, and you can add a group. Like you can say group 1 with this and group 2 with that. So you can become very complex, but the more complex you have, the more restrictive it could become. So you have to definitely recommend once you create it and deploy it, you want to test it out. So that's one of the best recommendations is that you define the rules, you define the policy, and you publish it for testing. So an example, let's take a quick end-to-end. I want to create a policy that I want to block everyone when a violation occurs. So let's say that, create a policy, and in my case, I want to, analysis purposes, I want to have PCI, and I'm going to say, next, I want to say protect in every location, or I want to say specific location. I don't want an exchange. I want specifically, I'm worried more about SharePoint or OneDrive, or I can choose site collections. Say, okay. Now in this case, being very specific. Only for SharePoint sites. Now I'm saying the moment you find credit card number, or I can edit it. other sensitivity types. In this case, I want to also add all credit cards, let's say. Add a group and I said detect when this kind is shared with people outside my organization or people in my organization. In this case, I'm trying to show the policy tips to the user and then also send them out, email notification. Customize the tip and email. Add specific group I want to send to. Let's say I want to send it to Alan and Pradeep. Or this could be a group as well. An email address. Let's say and I can say, okay, how many times this violation should occur within that info type in the document? I should say even once, or you can say sometimes based on information theft or information leak on a big scale versus there's intention, hey, I'm going to have ever share with one patient or something like that. You want to make sure that you want to catch even a single instance occurring. So that's when you put one in there. Or if you're okay, hey, don't trigger this policy until you have 10 credit card information in a single file. Restrict access. Okay, next. In this case, remember we're talking about, do you allow the people to override the policy? So I'm going to say yes. And if you want to allow them, you can say, require a business justification to override. Override the rule automatically if they say report it as a false positive. Next. And now here, okay, you got all of your things ready. Are you going to turn on right away? I would not recommend that at all. First, always try to test it out first and have the show policy tips while in test mode. So you get a user will have a feedback, and you as a owner of the policy have a way to test this and test multiple documents first and review your rules and policy, then say create. So how fast this policy gets deployed and made available, we have seen it once you create and publish it. It could take anywhere from an hour to 4 hours to almost, we have seen with this COVID-19 and all the heavy loads on Office 365, we heard that it's going to take up to 24 hours. So the rules wait for it to publish, but just generally we have seen it within an hour implemented, and then it goes and applies this rule on the existing content, okay? But once you define the rule, it will start analyzing all the content out there, but it does not apply for the old emails, right? It's not about the emails already sent out. When it comes to emails, it's at the applied at the transport level, not necessarily at the storage level. So it will catch when you're ready to send an email after this policy is ready in your tenant and available, it will start catching it. It's not instantaneously. It's not like you define a policy and then say, go catch from this moment. It's going to take some time to catch up. Whenever you upload a document to a library, it does not going to detect the violation immediately. This technology depends on crawl, and the content has to be processed by SharePoint. That means some search engine behind the scenes has to go through that and pick it up. And then once it starts go through that process, it's going to classify it, understand all the sensitivity information inside the documents, and then it applies the conditions on it. So I always recommend that you try it out and with multiple policies and see which combination is working better, and then you turn on the one that's really working for you. So this is how you deploy these policies. Once the policies are deployed, as we have shown, the end users will start seeing these warnings. The users will have the tips. You could put it custom policy tip. You can see the text as well, default versus your custom text in this case. And if you think that's not the right one, you can report an issue to the administrator. And that concludes the demo for the DLP.
So I'll pick it up here with proactive and reactive threat management. I wanted to, thank you, Puri, for that demo and for supplementing all of our Christmas shopping this year with those credit cards that you showed us.
Yeah, you should upload all the credit card and write and share with each other.
Right. So obviously what we've seen thus far is very proactive. DLP, data loss prevention, all the labels, all the configurations that Puri has shown us, with his demos is very valuable information. And one of the things that we've commonly seen with a lot of our incident response projects and a lot of the items that we tackle on a daily basis is threats. And that includes threats to Office 365, threats to Google G Suite, threats to other cloud service providers. In this case, with Microsoft and Office 365, threat protection is one of those things where you can approach it from two perspectives: proactive and reactive. DLP is more on the proactive side. You're configuring policies, procedural written policies, and then you're also configuring things in place where you're defining, educating people on what this means with the policy tips and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. With threat management, you're either faced with one of two things or both. In some cases, you're faced with dashboards where you just have a flow of information as to, hey, these are the types of attacks your organization is being targeted with. These are the type of attacks that you can respond to. This is what they mean to your organization, et cetera, et cetera. The other factor is investigations, and that's the reactive side. So when something does happen, Office 365 does have the capability and the tools built into it to perform investigations. Now, within the Office 365 platform, we won't go into too much detail like we did with DLP here to exactly how that works, but you can always reach out to us and we can cover these subjects. But with investigations, there's ways of Office 365 essentially performing the investigation for you because they have the entire audit trail. So if there's an business email compromise or some sort of malicious email that's infiltrated your 365 environment, you can take advantage of those tools to essentially trace down and track where it came from, how it hit your environment, et cetera, et cetera. So really, our biggest recommendation is be proactive, take advantage of the built-in features. Obviously there's some disparity with licensing. Not all licenses will include all features. However, most organizations we encounter, they're using at least an E3 or enterprise level 3 license, which includes majority of the functionality that we were talking about here. And with the proactive side, you can only protect what you know. Same with DLP. You want to identify your risks. You want to identify the data that your SharePoint sites are storing, your OneDrive sites are storing. Once you've identified your risks, your most valuable objects, your most valuable files, you're more likely to protect it. And that even includes your most valuable people. Spear phishing is a huge thing right now. And with proactive threat management, you can actually implement policies to protect your most valuable people. Like I mentioned, with policies, some of the examples is anti-phishing, safe attachments. You can look for things like malware and user submissions. And with these policies, you can then set up alerts. You can set up alerts to specific users. So if a user receives a file or an email that has certain characteristics to it, whether it's phrases or words or senders or failure with validation checks with DKIM or SPF, you can alert users proactively to be aware of that information. Many organizations nowadays already implementing this in the footer method, or nowadays it's actually in the header. They're putting a big red bar at the top and saying that, hey, this email has come in externally. It's from an external source. So be wary of what you're opening, be wary of what you're clicking on. And obviously with threat management, you want to be able to take your current security filtering protocols. If you have external mail filters, physical mail filters, or if you're using hosted email security through some other third-party provider or third-party antivirus provider, you can use Office 365 to essentially layer on security layers. So just like Puri mentioned, DLP, data loss prevention, identifying the files and then securing them is very important. And many organizations that are already implementing a lot of the hosted email security technology, they have DLP as well. So you can have multiple layers. Of course, it can get hairy there and it can get kind of confusing. So you definitely want to be careful. But when it comes to reducing your risk, you really want to be able to take advantage of as many tools that are available to you. That way you can take the technical aspect out of it and then focus on training, education, and making sure that your employees and your staff are aware of the type of attacks and how to not fall victim for them. Another great thing of threat management is simulating attacks. With threat management, you're able to essentially perform phishing tests, and it's built into Office 365, and that's a wonderful feature because not only can you embarrass people, even though that's not the goal, really you're bringing up more opportunities for training. And obviously, you don't want to embarrass people, but you want to be able to create more opportunities for identifying the weaker links in your organization, because your security infrastructure, your security, you're waking up at 4 in the morning every morning and looking at your dashboards and making sure your environment is secure. It's only as strong as the weakest link in your environment. So threat management, there's a lot to it in terms of what you can do to take advantage. And another part that, it kind of ties all of this together, I see DLP and threat management really go hand in hand, as well as monitoring and auditing logs, is because it creates a holistic picture, a holistic approach to security. So you're not focusing on just securing your documents and making sure they leave the environment, but you're also making sure that you are taking proactive steps to preventing malware from infiltrating your network, as well as making sure your employees are trained, and you're making sure that you have enough audited data on the back end. That way, in the event that something does happen, you have all the data necessary to be able to not only identify the threat, where it came from, how it entered, who it came from, what was the original intent, what data did they see, was there data exfiltration, was there no data exfiltration, and you can eventually get to a point where you can prove that. With my experience with incident response, the number of times that we're faced with projects and we have to say that, hey, there's just not enough data to come to a definitive conclusion. A lot of it's circumstantial. Unfortunately, it's above 90% for a lot of our response. So just a couple notes here as a few key takeaways in terms of auditing as we kind of wrap up here. And that's the fact that Office 365 by default has a 90-day retention period. Many people aren't aware of this. That's really 3 months, maybe. We obviously recommend you download those logs, archive them in a cold storage, essentially, either locally, and have a backup to make sure that in the event that something does happen, you have those logs available to you. Now, whether you ingest them into a SIEM or just store them away as CSV files that are compressed, that's totally up to you. But as long as you have the data, we recommend archiving data for at least 18 months. We've seen certain investigations that it would uncover attacks and compromises that have occurred a year prior to when we were originally starting the investigation. We've had one instance where halfway through an investigation, we found indicators of compromise that were leading to a breach that dated 7 years prior to when we started. So definitely want to be aware of the logs that you have available to you. Another point I wanted to make is that Office 365 does offer specific mailbox auditing for very specific granular activity that occurs on a mailbox. Granted, it's only available to Enterprise 5 licensed users. However, there was a time when it had to be manually enabled, but now it's enabled by default. All the auditing controls are enabled. And if you have access to that, that is very, very powerful in the event of a threat, or even in the event of validating user activity, making sure that people aren't accessing things they shouldn't be accessing.
Yeah, to add to that, you also have a programmatic way of exporting that data, not only from the email activity and SharePoint sharing file activity, but also the DLP alerts can also be programmatically exported into your own SIM tool or other proprietary tool you want to build. You could always subscribe to those events as
well. Yeah. And really to drive the point home here is that SharePoint and OneDrive has logging and alerts in and of itself. And Prairie could probably speak more to this, but you do have the capability of setting up not only alerting configurations, but for common email compromises or misuses of SharePoint, OneDrive data. You're not limited to just auditing and keeping track of Exchange. I think that's, from my experience and from what I've seen, is that's a little bit of a common misconception with Office 365, where everything revolves around email and Exchange, where SharePoint and OneDrive are these monoliths on the internet, and they offer very robust auditing controls and DLP, mail flow alerts, information governance. And the cool thing, and Prairie touched on this, is that Microsoft provides you with a lot of default configurations already, a lot of templates, a lot of checkboxes that you can kind of go in and just check boxes, and a lot of those alerts, a lot of those configurations are already in place for you. Things like not only identifying credit cards in DLP, but things like identifying what a targeted spearfish would look like based on certain indicators within the email. So obviously we encourage users to explore DLP, threat management, and just make sure your auditing logs are enabled. I didn't mention it in the last slide, but audit logging in security and compliance is not on by default. So if you start up a new tenant and you full steam ahead, your business is 100 miles an hour forward, pump the brakes, go back, click the little checkbox. I'll take a slide back here. You'll see a little message at the top. It says to use this feature, turn on auditing so we can start recording user and admin activity in your organization. Click the turn on auditing button. There's no extra mysterious fees that are going to show up on your billing statement, as just included in the system. And as long as you turn it on, you can now leverage that data for your benefit and for the protection of your organization. So as we wrap up here, any questions that you guys can send either directly to us or through this webinar channel, we'll be more than happy to answer those questions and get back to you. Any closing statements, Prairie?
Yeah, so no, this is great. I hope everybody's got an idea of how to turn on the DLP and how to leverage DLP capabilities. And if you have any further questions, reach out to us, and really appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.